This video was brought to you by Nebula. On November 5th, as US citizens elect their new president, one group of citizens, those in Puerto Rico, will be unable to vote. On that same day though, Puerto Ricans will elect their own territorial government and vote in a non-binding referendum on pursuing full statehood or independence for the US territory. The 3 million strong island has an unusual status quo. It is, quote, simultaneously part of, yet apart from, the rest of the country. Puerto Rican residents are US citizens, subject to federal laws and eligible for the draft, but lack full political representation and the same rights as mainland Americans. For instance, they can't vote for president, and their sole representative in the US Congress is non-voting. Most federal taxes extend to Puerto Rico, though Puerto Ricans generally don't pay federal income tax, meaning that they receive fewer federal benefits than other Americans. So in this video, we'll explain how Puerto Rico ended up like this, why a referendum is being held, and whether it will actually end with Puerto Rico as the 51st US state. Before we start, if you're interested in global alliances and groupings like the US's relationship with Puerto Rico, you might like our brand new poster, Every Global Alliance Explains, which shows, in slightly confusing detail, how every country interacts with each other. It's available by clicking the link in the description, and for a limited time, you can get 20% off with code UNITED. So let's start with a bit of background. After 400 years as a Spanish colony, Puerto Rico was ceded to the US in 1898, following the Spanish-American War. In 1900, Congress designated it as an unorganized territory of the US, with limited self-governance and a non-voting representative in Congress. Congress then granted Puerto Rican citizenship in 1917 and allowed for more self-rule, though key officials like the governor remained US appointees. After World War II, Congress then granted Puerto Rico further powers, electing its own governor in 1948 and becoming the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico in 1952, after its constitution was approved. The following decades brought an economic boom, as the island urbanized and manufacturing grew rapidly thanks to incentives like tax exemptions and comparatively low labor costs. This wouldn't last though. Historic legislation and the island's constitution enable Puerto Rico to grow reliant on using borrowed funds from bond issuance to balance its budget, creating a debt snowball. This problem accelerated as economy-driving tax incentives expired and companies withdrew, prompting the Puerto Rican government to increasingly turn to debt to cover its spending. The island was then hit particularly hard by the 2008 financial crisis and a continuing exodus of Puerto Ricans to the US mainland. And by 2015, the Puerto Rican government began defaulting on its public debt, which had reached an estimated $72 billion. As a US territory, it was unable to receive assistance from international lenders like the IMF, but without full statehood, it was unable to seek the bankruptcy protections that mainland US municipalities could. So in 2016, Congress passed an act called PROMESA, which enabled Puerto Rico to effectively declare bankruptcy and established a debt restructuring process and unelected oversight board with full control over Puerto Rico's finances. The board's austerity measures and unelected nature did not make it popular, and the next few years saw Puerto Rico ravaged by natural disasters like the devastating Hurricane Maria in 2018, the federal response to which was criticized for being slow and insufficient. Puerto Rico finally exited bankruptcy in 2022 after a debt restructuring plan was finally approved. These dramatic events have unsurprisingly fueled a long-running debate over Puerto Rico's status. The island's two main political parties are largely defined not by left or right, but by their support for full US statehood or maintaining Commonwealth status, while other groups advocate for full independence. For proponents of statehood, becoming the 51st US state would bring much needed economic benefits and secure full political rights for the people of Puerto Rico, while those favoring the status quo see it as the best of both worlds, the key to preserving the island's unique identity, while independence advocates see independence as a culmination of a decolonial struggle that began centuries ago under Spanish rule. In case you hadn't noticed though, Puerto Rico's status has remained virtually unchanged over the past 7 decades, even though basically every president since at least Richard Nixon has stated an openness to or support for statehood, should Puerto Ricans actually want it. Periodic attempts by the US Congress to address the question have languished though. The furthest progress was a bill passed by the House of Representatives in 2022 that would have established a process for a binding referendum. However, the bill expired before it could be taken up by the Senate, where its success was unlikely anyway. Meanwhile, the status question has actually been put to Puerto Rico many times already. In fact, this November's referendum will be the 7th non-binding status referendum that Puerto Rico has held, with the questions and options differing over time. The first two, in 1967 and 1993, showed a preference for maintaining Commonwealth status, but at the next vote in 1998, none of the above won. In 2012, Puerto Ricans voted in a two-part question. First, they rejected the current status by a 54-46 margin, and voted 61% in favour of statehood as the alternative, but more than one-third of voters left the second part blank. In 2017, 97% voted for statehood, but the turnout was just 23% due to boycotts by pro-Commonwealth and pro-independence parties over the ballot's language. Then, most recently in 2020, was a straight yes-no referendum on pursuing statehood, in which more than 52% of voters said yes to statehood on a turnout of just under 55%. What about November's referendum? This time round, voters will be presented with 3 options: statehood, independence, or independence with free association, i.e. along the lines of what Micronesia or the Marshall Islands have, to be properly negotiated later. Notably absent from the ballot is the island's current status. Puerto Rico's pro-statehood governor said that the referendum is aimed at demanding action from the US Congress. However, it's unsurprisingly not gone down well with other Puerto Rican parties, who have called for their supporters to cast blank votes, because they variously see it as inconsequential, an expensive distraction, or a ploy by the governor's party to encourage pro-statehood voters to the polls, as the legislature, governorship, and resident commissioner are all up for election. It's probably safe, therefore, to assume that the statehood option will win. However, opposing forces will point to what will likely be a high number of blank votes as evidence that the question has not been settled. So, to put it bluntly, November's referendum will not change Puerto Rico's status. This much is obvious, as it is yet another non-binding referendum. And that's because Puerto Rico cannot plan a binding referendum on its own, as the power to actually go through with statehood, or an alternative change of status, lies with the US Congress. That being said, the referendum may provide the statehood movement with a greater impetus to call for change. But given the experience of previous referendums, this is not enough to actually affect change. Ultimately, if statehood is to happen, it requires not just a clear and decisive call for action from Puerto Rico, but also a receptive US federal government to act on it. Given that support for Puerto Rican statehood in mainland US politics generally falls along party lines, one cannot really expect progress towards statehood being made unless the Democrats control the House, Senate, and presidency, which is a tall order to say the least. Evidently, there's a lot at stake for the upcoming US election then, and sometimes it can be hard to keep up with the, let's face it, crazy election cycle and its twists and turns. After all, who would have predicted a last-minute change of candidate, let alone talk of burying bears in Central Park, Brad Summers, or Elon Musk joking about assassination attempts back at the start of the year? But we have been paying attention to all of these things, because they're not just silly, they're actually politically quite important. In fact, we've been documenting them in WTF USA, our slightly tongue-in-cheek look at the US election. For example, in recent episodes, we've talked about Trump's foray into the world of crypto, claims of dog eating, and AI-generated Musk memes. These might sound stupid, but they actually tell us a lot about the candidate's economic plans, the state of post-truth politics, and how the US feels about its deficit. That is to say, WTF USA brings you the wildest moments from the 2024 election, tells you the hidden political meaning behind each of them, and then if you can just ignore the chaos, or if you should follow along. New videos come out every Friday only on Nebula. That's the streaming service we built alongside a bunch of our creator friends, and where you can find all kinds of superb content like WTF. We're super proud of WTF USA, and we hope that with your support, we'll be able to make other interesting, weird, and entertaining series with Nebula in the future. So signing up genuinely helps TLDR to grow and expand. As I say, it's not just WTF either. There's a whole bunch of other original content on the service, from creators like Real Life Law, Wendover Productions, and Neo. You can also watch every normal TLDR video ad-free on Nebula as well, and in some instances, before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click the link in the description to get 40% off. That's just $30 for a year, or $2.50 a month. We really hope you check out the series, and as always, thanks for your support.